Hi everyone, Rosie here. Welcome back to my channel. I join you today with an embarrassingly large book haul. I know the title down below says summer, but that's just because it's the only one I'm going to make all summer. I actually bought all of these in July and I'm just now getting around to filming this and posting this video. So let's get into it because this is probably going to be a long one. So can do that classic thing that everyone says, make yourself a drink, grab a snack, and please don't judge me too much. This actually all started way back at the very end of June when I was on my reading vacation, link in whichever corner there is to the vlog from that if you're interested. And I was doing so well. I'd read like 7 books in a week. I was like, go Rosie, you're reading so much. You should treat yourself. You should buy yourself some books. And friends, that may have been a mistake. The first book I bought was 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker, which I have learned after the fact is a alternate pen name that Tom Holt writes under. So I'm sort of disappointed because if you saw my recent wrap-up, I actually haven't been loving Tom Holt lately, but anyways, this is an embarrassing purchase. In addition to all the other embarrassment in the size of this haul, I put this on my wish list years ago, probably. And I saw it and I was like, oh damn, right, I'm reading this book with the Crusades right now. That one sounds super interesting. In my head, the whole time, 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City is a non-fiction book about siege warfare. I bought it, I'm like, yes, it's gonna be so much fun to read. I realized when I was writing up the notes for this, it's not about siege warfare. It's not non-fiction. It's a novel about some sort of engineer who has to defend a walled city against some sort of invaders. So it sounds interesting, I'll read it eventually. I just feel so stupid for somehow for years believing that this book was a totally different genre to what it is. Has this ever happened to any of you? Let me know. What were your misinformations that you've had? The next book I bought, which I did know what this one was when I bought it, so pat on the back for that, is Moccasin Square Garden by Richard Van Camp. And this one is a short story collection set in far north of Canada, I think among an indigenous community up there. It's the impression I have from reading the back. And it's supposed to be funny, but also haunted by a legendary monster which has been awakened by global warming and human greed. So that should be interesting. I'm actually hoping to get to this one really soon. The next book I picked up is Pressure Cooker, and I'm going to read from my phone for this one because it has a very long subtitle and a lot of authors. So it's called Pressure Cooker, Why Home Cooking Won't Solve Our Problems and What We Can Do About It, and it's by Sarah Bowen, Joslyn Brenton, and Sinikka Elliott. So the premise of this book, from what I understand, is that when we talk about health crises or the environmental impact of our food system, so often we talk about home cooking as if people just cooked more at home, we wouldn't have the obesity crisis or stuff like that. And from what I understand, this book explores the very real barriers that exist to families and why it's not as simple as just, well, stop buying food at McDonald's and eat at home, which, yes, in a perfect world, that would be the easy answer, but I think this book gets into, yeah, the barriers that actual people face in implementing that advice. And the last book that I bought in this Go Rosie, You're Reading So Much spree was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. And if you haven't heard of this one, it's a story of a Japanese woman who doesn't really fit in with the world around her, starts working in a convenience store. She's still working there like 18 years later, and I think faces pressures from her family and her coworkers and society at large to do more with her life and get married and get a real job and all of that. So really, it sounds like a really interesting novel. I'm looking forward to reading that. The next 3 books are books all by indigenous authors from Canada about indigenous issues in Canada/North America, because on Canada Day I was having major feelings of like, damn, this is something I should know more about. I should know more about colonialism in Canada, and I really don't know that much. And also I was like, hey, Canada Day, let's support some indigenous people today. So I got The Inconvenient Indian, A Curious Account of Native People in North America by Thomas King, which is a, to quote, a critical and personal meditation about what it means to be Indian in North America. And this is one of those books that I've seen around for many years and just haven't read. So without even knowing too much about it, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna fix that gap in my reading and pick it up. Next, I got Legacy, Trauma, Story, and Indigenous Healing by Suzanne Methot, which is about intergenerational trauma and colonialism and the impact that that has had on the mental and physical health of Indigenous peoples in North America. And then I think also looks into how we can start to reverse that process and heal those issues. I think using sort of Indigenous knowledge and traditions and stuff, which just sounds so interesting. I think it's all three of these I imagine are going to be really heavy reads, but super important, super interesting, really looking forward to hearing that perspective. And finally, I have 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph. So I've actually already read this one. I talk about it in my July wrap-up, which I will link in whichever corner this shows up in. I'm still very bad at this. But essentially it's about the Indian Act, which is the piece of legislation which governs the relationship between the Government of Canada and the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And it breaks it down into how the law is written and what impact the implementation of that law has had on Indigenous peoples in Canada throughout the last 200 years or so. I guess it's 150? Something along those lines. As I said, I've already read that, so I can say for sure that it was really good and that I highly recommend it. And you should check it out if this is a topic you're interested in learning more about. Next up, we have a book that I picked up 100% because of BookTube. Mrita of Mrita by the Book mentioned it in a video sometime in July, and it sounded so good that I immediately bought it, and that is Penric's Demon by Lois McMaster Bujold, which is apparently about a young man who gets mysterious powers from a dying woman, and I don't know much more about it other than the fact that Mrita recommended it. She has amazing taste in books, and I like pretty much everything that we've both read, so looking forward to picking this one up. It sounds super interesting. Next, we have another book that I've actually already read, and this one, well, let me tell you. I bought this book because the author liked one of my posts on Instagram, so I checked out his profile, saw that he had just written a book in French that was set in my home province. It's called Modifié by Sébastien Chauzu, and I was really in a place of man, it's embarrassing that I'm embarrassed of my French grammar in work emails. I don't like that. Reading more is probably a great way to start working on my grammar. So I picked this up. It's about a private detective who has to clear a cousin of murder, and also there's stuff going on in her life. I've read it and I still don't know how to summarize it to you. It's probably a spoiler for how I felt, but if you want to hear my full review, it's also in my July wrap-up. Now we come into the bulk of this video, which is a slew of books that I bought because they were on sale and they were cheap and they've been on my wish list for a while, so you know what, why not? Because this video is going to be forever long, that's why. The first one of those is Emma by Jane Austen, and I know basically nothing about this book other than the fact that Clueless, the most iconic of 90s movies, and one of my favorite, is apparently a movie adaptation of this book. I love the movie, maybe I'll love the book. I also haven't tried to read Jane Austen since, I think, middle school, so I'm hoping that this time around I'll enjoy it more and maybe get into her works a bit, because I have not had a great record with the classics historically, so trying again. Next up I have a book called Scotland, A History from the Earliest Times by Alistair Moffat. I'm just going to read the blurb because this is what sold me on it. It says, from the Ice Age to the recent Scottish referendum, historian and author Alistair Moffat explores the history of the Scottish nation. It sounds like a big, dense history book that I'm going to read before bed. I'm so on board, looking forward to that. Not much else to say about it. I don't think it's a particularly exciting book, or one that anyone's going to be hype about, but I need to keep a constant stock of boring history books to put me to sleep in my TBR, so that I'm never lying awake without one to read. And this seemed like it fit the bill, so I picked that up. I also picked up Nova by Samuel R. Delany, and again I'm going to read the quote, because it says it's nominally space opera. It explores the politics and culture of a future where cyborg technology is universal, yet making major decisions can involve using tarot cards. That just sounds neat! I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about Samuel Delany and his writing. Just sounds cool, so I picked it up. You might be sensing a trend. Next up, I have A Dance with Time, The Origins of the Calendar by Michael Judge, which is, I think, pretty much exactly what the title says. It's about the history of the calendar, how we got to the calendar we have today. I think there's stuff about, like, religious festivals, things like that. Again, it sounds interesting. Will probably be another bedtime, boring book to put me to sleep. Boring's not a bad thing with bedtime books, by the way. It's just it's probably not going to be super exciting, but that's what I'm looking for. The next book I picked up is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, which is one that I picked up because I've seen so many people here on BookTube talk about it and love it, that I thought I should give it a go. From what I understand, it's set in the Russian wilderness. There's a young woman who has to save her family from spirits. Young woman, girl, I'm not sure which it is. Anyway, she has to save her family from spirits that are threatening them. And it sounded cute and it sounded interesting, and I've seen nothing but good things about it, so I thought, hey, give that a go too. Next I have Trainwreck, The Women We Love to Hate, Mock, and Fear, and Why by Sadie Doyle. So from what I understand, this book is about women who don't behave or don't follow the life path that society expects of them or appear in public the way that they should, and why we're so fascinated with them, and why that, yeah, I don't know too much about it. It sounds interesting. One of the examples they list is one of their train wrecks is Britney Spears and her infamous breakdowns. Next up, I have The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold, which, again, one of those books that's been everywhere on BookTube and sounds so cool and so up my alley. It's about the victims of Jack the Ripper, but it tells their story up until the point they were murdered, not about their murder. So I think it talks about where they came from and what their lives were like, and just what lives were like for lower class women in Victorian London in general. Oh my god, I'm so excited to read this one. I can't believe it's taken me this long to get around to it. So up my alley, sounds so fascinating, and it comes so highly reviewed, so I'm just beyond excited to read this one. Next, I picked up The Mercies by Corin Millwood Hargrave, which is about a small town in coastal Norway in the 1600s, and most, if not all, of the men die in some sort of sea-related boat accident while out fishing. And then all of the women in this small community are left to fend for themselves and without that protection and all of that sort of thing. Sounds interesting. Apparently there's witchcraft, and also, according to Lauren of Lauren and the Books, sexual flatbread making? What? I don't know. I'm so excited. Sounds so cool. I also picked up Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. From what I understand, it's sort of a multi-generational family story, and it all centers around a coming-of-age celebration for a 16-year-old in 2001, but then goes back to look at her mother and her grandparents and stuff to explore how the family got to the point where they are now. Intergenerational long passage family stories are something I've been really getting into lately. This one sounds so interesting. I've seen, I don't know where, but I feel like I've seen people speaking highly of this lately, so excited to check that out. I should just record that once and then stick it at the end of every one of these if I'm going to say it all the time. Next up, I have Revolution Sunday by Wendy Guerra, and it is supposedly a novel about glamour, surveillance, and corruption in contemporary Cuba. And Wendy Guerra is apparently a huge author in Cuban literature right now, and I think pretty big internationally in the Spanish-speaking world, but this is the first book of hers that's been translated into English. It sounds so interesting. The premise is that a Cuban woman travels to Spain to accept a literary prize, and while she's there, none of the Cuban expats there really want to associate with her because they think she's a spy sent by the Cuban government to spy. But then when she gets back to Cuba, she finds herself under surveillance and under suspicion for having had contact with these people outside of Cuba. So it sounds fascinating. I'm really excited to read this. It sounds totally unlike anything I've read lately, and it should be fantastic. Next up, I have Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism by Kristen Godsey. Seen this one recommended by a couple different channels here on BookTube that I really like, and from what I understand, it's about how socialism can and has affected women's place in society and gender relations in general, not just about sex, but sort of how that different system of organizing society can affect women in many different ways. Okay, we're nearing the end, I promise, but we've got a little more to go. I was having a stressful morning at work, came across an ad on Instagram for a 40% off sale at Verso Books to celebrate their 50th anniversary, and I just lost all self-control. All of the rest of these have been bought sort of, 1 or 2 a week type thing, or I guess 3 or 4 a week, but like one here, one there. I was picking them up as I went along, and it was just like the floodgates opened and I bought way too much. So I picked up Narcoland by Annabelle Hernandez, which is about drug cartels in Mexico and how they rose to be so powerful, and I think also about how it's not just limited to like the criminals in the cartels, but how the cartels are linked to politicians and the police and business people and just society in general. So that sounds really cool. I think, if I'm thinking of the right person, I think she might be like in hiding, or at least she was around the time that this book came out, because it was so controversial and so many like naming the names. So this one should be really interesting. I'm interested in the drug trafficking world from an academic and like outside perspective, obviously. So I'm really looking forward to reading this one. Next, I have Tibet on Fire, Self-Immolations Against Chinese Rule by Tsering Wooser. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this is about the oppression faced by Tibetans under Chinese rule and why Tibetans are being driven to protest against Chinese rule, both through passive protests or less extreme ones, and then also this thing of self-immolation by monks where they set themselves on fire in protest. So I know an embarrassingly small amount about Tibet and the current situation in Tibet. I know, frankly, virtually nothing other than the fact that they're under Chinese rule and don't want to be. So this one sounds super interesting. Looking forward to reading that and hopefully learning a bit more about what's going on. Next, I picked up Dirty Secrets, How Tax Havens Destroy the Economy by Richard Murphy, which is about, as it says, tax havens and how the super rich use tax havens to hide their wealth, and then the impact that that has on the economy at large and society. Both as an economist and as someone who believes in paying taxes and helping others, I'm really interested to learn more about this. I don't know that much about tax havens and sort of how that effect of hiding that wealth impacts the economy at large. I'm looking forward to reading a more detailed analysis of that. Next up, I have Betraying Big Brother, The Feminist Awakening in China by Letta Hong Fincher, which is, as the title says, about the feminist movement in China, and then I think the effect that that's having on Chinese society, the Chinese ruling party, how the government is reacting and cracking down on some of that. I'm sorry, it's interesting. That's why I bought it. Looking forward to reading that one. Next, I have Feminism for the 99%, a manifesto by Cynthia Aruza, Tithi Bhattacharya, and Nancy Fraser, which puts forth a concept of feminism that's not just about, hey, well, we've reached an equal society when 50% of CEOs are women, but looking at actually a feminism that seeks to improve the lives and quality of life of women across all ends of the economic spectrum, not just super wealthy, powerful ones. So this is one of those books that I've seen around a lot. I've never gotten around to reading, so I'm hoping to do that. Obviously, that's why I bought it. Next up, I bought Revolting Prostitutes, The Fight for Sex Workers' Rights by Juno Max and Molly Smith, which looks at the legality of sex work from the point of view of sex workers. So how various legal restrictions and legal systems impact them, impact their safety. This is something where, for so many of these books, I feel like I've said, but I have a cursory knowledge of this, I have an interest in this, but I want to learn more. I feel like if you don't want to hear me say I want to learn more endlessly, this probably isn't the channel for you, but also please don't leave, because I like you all. But yeah, I just want to learn more, and this sounds so fascinating. I think it looks at like different legal systems from around the world and how the various laws in place translate into reality for sex workers. Also, Revolting Prostitutes, how great is that title? I was sold on that alone. Now, the last book, is We Have Never Been Middle Class, How Social Mobility Misleads Us by Hadass Weiss. And this book looks at, so across the political spectrum, we hear a lot about the middle class and the shrinking middle class and lifting up the middle class and all of this. But we never actually talk about what is the middle class? Who is the middle class? What level of wealth do they have? What is their place in society? So I think this book gets into the myth of, well, the middle class is an invention to make us feel better than working class. But we're all working class. So I'll have more to tell you about that once I've read it, but it sounds super interesting. I'm sorry. I should be banned from saying interesting on this channel. And excited, but it is interesting and I am excited. Here ends the massive, massive book haul. In case you're curious, that was 26 books in total, and don't expect another one of these soon. This has certainly been an anomaly in terms of how many books I've bought in a month, and I think I sort of lost track of things. It's like, it's for my booktube channel. I'm a booktuber now. I can buy books, it's great, but like, okay, I read 7 books in July, and I bought 26. Bit of a problem here. So I actually put myself on a book buying ban until at least October, but expect later in the year more reasonably sized book hauls with hopefully a more in-depth discussion of what each book is about. But I just felt like this was going to be so long as is. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you've read any of these books, please leave a comment down below. If there's any you want to hear me read / talk about sooner, let me know. If you liked this video, please hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, including hopefully some wrap-ups, including these books soon, hit the subscribe button down below, and thank you for watching!